Right now, as you listen to these words, something extraordinary is happening. You're conscious, you're aware. But what exactly is this experience of being you? Tonight we'll explore 100 theories about consciousness, the deepest mystery in all of science. From ancient philosophy to cutting-edge neuroscience, these ideas will guide you gently towards sleep while revealing the secrets of your own awareness. 1. Consciousness as pure wakefulness. Our first theory sees consciousness as pure wakefulness, the simple fact of being awake and aware. Ancient Buddhist philosophers called this the clear light of awareness, describing consciousness as the fundamental background against which all experience unfolds. Think of it like the canvas before the painting begins. This isn't about thoughts or feelings, but something even more basic, the raw capacity to be present. Modern neuroscientists have found that even in deep meditation, when thoughts fade away, this basic awareness remains. It's the difference between dreamless sleep and the moment you first wake up, before any particular thought arrives. 2. The mirror of the mind theory. This awareness naturally leads us to what philosophers call the mirror of the mind theory. Just as a perfect mirror reflects everything without judgment or distortion, consciousness serves as a neutral surface that simply receives whatever appears before it. The 17th century philosopher John Locke described the mind as a blank slate, but this theory goes deeper. Your consciousness doesn't create or change experiences. It simply witnesses them with crystal clarity. A sunset, a memory, a worry, all appear in this inner mirror with equal vividness. This reflective quality explains why you can observe your own thoughts and emotions as if watching them from a calm, centered place. 3. Consciousness as attention. Building on this foundation, many researchers propose that consciousness is essentially attention itself. William James, the father of American psychology, spent years studying how we focus our mental spotlight on different aspects of experience. When you read these words, your consciousness naturally directs itself toward the meaning, filtering out background sounds and physical sensations. This isn't just selective focus, it's consciousness actively shaping reality by choosing what deserves awareness. Brain imaging shows that attention and consciousness activate nearly identical neural networks, suggesting they might be different names for the same fundamental process. 4. Awareness as a spotlight. This brings us to consciousness as a spotlight, illuminating different corners of our inner world. Picture your mind as a vast, dark theater. Your conscious awareness moves like a gentle beam of light, revealing memories here, sensations there, thoughts floating in and out of view. Everything exists in the darkness, but only what touches the light becomes real to you. This spotlight isn't harsh or demanding, it's more like candlelight, soft and warm, revealing just enough to navigate your inner landscape. Sleep researchers have discovered that even during dreams, this spotlight continues moving, which is why dream narratives can shift so fluidly from scene to scene. 5. Consciousness as presence in the here and now. The spotlight naturally guides us toward consciousness as presence in the here and now. Eastern philosophy has long taught that true consciousness exists only in the present moment. The past lives in memory, the future in imagination, but consciousness itself is always happening right now. This isn't about forcing yourself to stay present, but recognizing that awareness itself never actually leaves this moment. Even when you remember yesterday or plan tomorrow, the act of remembering and planning happens in the eternal now. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio found that present moment awareness involves specific brain regions that create our sense of being embodied in time and space. 6th stream of consciousness. From presence, we drift into William James's famous stream of consciousness, the idea that awareness flows like a gentle river. Your consciousness doesn't jump from thought to thought like stones across water. Instead, it flows continuously, with each moment blending seamlessly into the next. James noticed that even gaps in thinking are part of the stream. The silence between thoughts has its own quality and texture. This flowing quality explains why consciousness feels so natural and effortless most of the time. You don't have to work to be aware. Awareness simply streams through you like water through a riverbed carved by millions of years of flowing. 7. Consciousness as perception. This stream carries us to consciousness as perception itself. Not just the five senses, but the deeper capacity to receive and recognize any form of information. Every sound, color, smell, and texture that reaches you is consciousness making contact with the world. But perception goes beyond the senses to include emotional tones, the feeling of familiarity, the recognition of patterns. When you instantly know a friend's voice on the phone, that's consciousness perceiving meaning beyond mere sound waves. Researchers studying perception have found that consciousness doesn't just receive information passively, it actively constructs our experienced reality from the raw data flowing through our senses. 8. Consciousness as inner light. Ancient traditions often describe consciousness as inner light, not metaphorical light, but an actual luminous quality that illuminates experience from within. This inner radiance explains why consciousness feels so different from physical objects. While external light reveals things outside us, the light of awareness reveals the contents of our inner world. Medieval mystics wrote about this inner illumination, and modern meditators often report experiences of brilliant clarity that seems to shine from consciousness itself. Some neuroscientists speculate that this subjective sense of luminosity might arise from the electrical activity that creates conscious experience in the brain. 9. Sentience as the essence of consciousness. This luminous quality points toward consciousness as pure sentience, the raw capacity for subjective experience. Sentience is what makes the difference between a rock and a living being. It's not about intelligence or complexity, but about the simple fact that there's something it's like to be you. A tree responds to sunlight, but presumably there's nothing it feels like to be a tree. Your consciousness, however, has this mysterious property of inner feeling, this sense that experiences happen to someone, that there's a subject at the center of all your perceptions. This is perhaps the deepest puzzle in neuroscience, how physical processes in the brain create this felt sense of being someone. 10. Awareness as a survival tool. Finally, we arrive at awareness as evolution's survival tool. Natural selection shaped consciousness not as a luxury, but as a practical advantage. Conscious awareness allows you to simulate different scenarios, plan for future challenges, and learn from past experiences in ways that purely automatic responses cannot match. When you pause before making a decision, consciousness gives you the space to consider options that aren't immediately present. This capacity for mental time travel, imagining yourself in different situations, provided our ancestors with crucial survival advantages. Modern research suggests that consciousness emerged because awareness itself became one of nature's most powerful tools for navigating complex, unpredictable environments. These 10 theories offer different windows into the same fundamental mystery. Consciousness remains one of nature's most beautiful puzzles, and you are both the mystery and the one experiencing it. Chapter 2. Ancient and Spiritual Views. For thousands of years, before brain scans or laboratory experiments, humans looked inward and asked the same question we're exploring tonight. What is consciousness? Ancient wisdom traditions developed profound theories about awareness that still influence how we think about the mind today. Let's journey through these timeless perspectives on what makes us conscious beings. 11. The soul as consciousness. The oldest theory of consciousness might also be the most enduring, the idea that consciousness is the soul itself. Ancient civilizations across the globe believed that awareness comes from an immortal essence that exists beyond the physical body. This soul consciousness is what experiences life, makes choices, and continues after death. Plato described the soul as the true self, temporarily housed in a physical form, but fundamentally separate from it. Modern philosophers still debate this dualist view, where consciousness exists as something distinct from brain activity. While neuroscience hasn't found evidence for a separate soul, the intuitive feeling that your conscious self is somehow more than just neurons firing remains powerful for many people. 12th, consciousness as divine spark. Building on the soul concept, many traditions view consciousness as a fragment of the divine within each person. This divine spark theory suggests that human awareness is literally a piece of universal consciousness, God, the cosmos, or ultimate reality, experiencing itself through individual minds. The Gnostic Christians called this the Pneuma, while Hindu traditions speak of consciousness as Brahman, manifesting in countless forms. This perspective transforms consciousness from a biological accident into something sacred and meaningful. When you become aware of your own awareness, you're touching something infinite. Modern physicists like Freeman Dyson have speculated whether consciousness might indeed be a fundamental feature of the universe itself. 13th, Hindu idea of Atman. Hindu philosophy offers one of the most sophisticated theories of consciousness in the concept of Atman, the eternal, unchanging self that exists beyond thoughts, emotions, and even personality. Unlike Western psychology's focus on the ego or personal identity, Atman represents pure consciousness without content. The Upanishads, ancient Sanskrit texts, describe Atman as the witness that observes all mental activity without being affected by it. This consciousness is identical to Brahman, universal reality, making the famous statement, Tattvamasi, thou art that. Meditation practices in Hinduism aim to realize this deeper identity by dissolving the false sense of being a separate individual. Contemporary neuroscientists studying advanced meditators have found brain states that seem to correspond to this sense of pure, contentless awareness. 14th, Buddhist no-self theory. Buddhism presents a radical challenge to most consciousness theories. There is no fixed self or consciousness at all. The Buddha taught that what we call consciousness is actually a constantly changing stream of mental moments, each arising and passing away so quickly that we mistakenly believe there's a permanent observer. This Atman, or no-self doctrine, suggests that consciousness is more like a river than a lake, always flowing, never the same from moment to moment. What we experience as continuous awareness is actually millions of discrete moments of consciousness, each lasting mere milliseconds. Modern cognitive science has found support for this view, showing that consciousness seems to be constructed from many separate processes rather than emerging from a single unified source. 15th, Taoist flow of consciousness. Taoism views consciousness as part of the natural flow of existence, like water flowing downhill or seasons changing. Rather than something we possess, consciousness is something we participate in. The Tao Te Ching describes this as Wu Wei, effortless action that arises from being in harmony with the natural flow of life. Consciousness, in this view, works best when it doesn't try to control or force experiences, but simply allows awareness to move naturally. This flowing consciousness recognizes that fighting against life creates suffering, while moving with its currents brings peace and wisdom. Neuroscientists studying flow states, those moments of effortless performance in sports or creativity, have found brain patterns that seem remarkably similar to what Taoist texts describe as natural, unforced awareness. 16th, Egyptian Ka and Ba. Ancient Egyptians developed a complex theory of consciousness involving multiple souls. The Ka represented the life force, or vital energy that animated the body, while the Ba was the personality and individual consciousness that could travel between worlds. After death, the Ba would journey through the afterlife while remaining connected to the physical body through the Ka. This dual aspect theory suggests that consciousness has both universal and personal dimensions, a life energy shared with all living things, and a unique individual awareness that defines who you are. The elaborate mummification process was designed to preserve the Ka so the Ba could continue its conscious existence. Modern researchers studying near-death experiences sometimes reference these ancient Egyptian concepts when trying to understand reports of consciousness persisting beyond clinical death. 17th Greek Pneuma. The ancient Greeks contributed the concept of Pneuma, literally meaning breath or spirit, as the substance of consciousness. Stoic philosophers like Chrysippus believed that Pneuma was a subtle material that flowed through the body, carrying thoughts, sensations, and awareness. Unlike our modern view of consciousness as somehow separate from the physical world, Pneuma was seen as a refined type of matter, more like air or fire than solid flesh. This theory bridges the gap between material and spiritual explanations of consciousness. The Stoics taught that by understanding and aligning with the Pneuma within us, we could achieve wisdom and inner peace. Interestingly, modern research on breathing practices has shown that controlled breathing can significantly alter states of consciousness, suggesting the ancient Greeks may have been onto something profound about the connection between breath and awareness. 18th. Medieval Scholastic views. Medieval Christian philosophers, particularly Thomas Aquinas, developed sophisticated theories about consciousness that attempted to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. They distinguished between the vegetative soul, growth and nutrition, the animal soul, sensation and movement, and the rational soul, thought and consciousness, that exists only in humans. This rational soul was considered immortal and created directly by God for each person. Aquinas argued that consciousness required both a material brain and an immaterial soul working together, the soul as the form of the body. These scholastic theories influenced Western thought for centuries and continue to inform contemporary discussions about whether consciousness can be fully explained by physical processes alone. Modern philosophers still debate whether Aquinas' integration of material and spiritual aspects of mind offers insights that pure materialism might miss. 19th. Islamic Concept of Ruh. Islamic philosophy describes consciousness through the concept of Ruh, the spirit that God breathed into Adam to give him life and awareness. The Quran speaks of this divine breath as what distinguishes conscious beings from mere matter. Islamic scholars like Al-Ghazali and Ibn Sina developed detailed theories about how the Ruh creates different levels of consciousness, from basic awareness in animals to higher spiritual consciousness in humans capable of knowing God. The Ruh is seen as both individual and universal. Each person has their own consciousness, but all consciousness ultimately derives from the same divine source. This perspective emphasizes that consciousness has moral and spiritual dimensions, not just biological ones. Sufi mystics developed practices to purify consciousness and return it to its divine origin, experiences they described as the ultimate fulfillment of human awareness. 20. Indigenous animistic perspectives. Indigenous cultures worldwide share a view of consciousness that extends far beyond humans to include animals, plants, rocks, rivers, and entire landscapes. This animistic perspective sees consciousness as the fundamental quality of existence itself. Everything has some form of awareness or spirit, creating an interconnected web of consciousness throughout nature. Aboriginal Australians speak of the dream time, where all consciousness is connected in an eternal now. Native American traditions describe consciousness as something that flows between all beings, making the boundaries between self and world much more fluid than Western psychology typically assumes. These perspectives challenge our modern assumption that consciousness is rare and special, instead suggesting it might be the most common feature of existence. Recent research in plant behavior and the sensitivity of ecosystems has led some scientists to reconsider whether forms of awareness might indeed be more widespread in nature than we previously thought. These ancient theories remind us that consciousness has always been humanity's greatest mystery. Each tradition offers a different lens for understanding the miracle of your own awareness as you drift peacefully towards sleep. Chapter 3: Early Scientific Theories. As humanity moved from ancient wisdom to modern science, brilliant minds began applying systematic observation and logic to consciousness itself. These early scientific theories laid the foundation for everything we understand about the mind today. Let's explore how the first scientific thinkers approached the mystery of awareness with tools of reason and careful study. 21st. Dualism, mind and body as separate. René Descartes revolutionized thinking about consciousness in the 1600s with a simple but profound idea. Mind and body are fundamentally different substances. His famous statement, "I think, therefore I am," identified consciousness as the one thing he could know with absolute certainty. Descartes argued that the physical body operates like a machine, following the laws of physics, while the mind exists as an immaterial substance that can think, feel, and make free choices. The two interact through the pineal gland in the brain, he proposed. This dualist theory explains why consciousness feels so different from physical objects, because it literally is different, made of mind stuff rather than matter. Modern neuroscience struggles with dualism because we can't find this separate mental substance, but the theory still captures something important about why consciousness feels fundamentally unlike anything else in the physical world. 22nd. Monism, mind and body as one. Philosophers like Baruch Spinoza challenged Descartes by arguing that mind and body aren't separate substances, but different aspects of the same underlying reality. This monist approach suggests that what we call consciousness and what we call brain activity are simply two ways of describing the same phenomenon, like looking at a coin from both sides. Spinoza believed that everything in existence, from rocks to humans, has both physical and mental aspects, though most things have such simple mental aspects that we don't recognize them as conscious. This elegant solution avoids the problem of how immaterial mind could interact with material brain. Contemporary neuroscientists often adopt a similar perspective, seeing consciousness as what brain activity feels like from the inside. When neurons fire in specific patterns, the physical process is simultaneously the mental experience, two descriptions of one event. 23rd. Materialism, consciousness as matter. Materialist philosophers took the bold step of arguing that consciousness is nothing more than matter in motion. Thinkers like Julien de la Mettrie in the 1700s proposed that humans are essentially sophisticated biological machines, and consciousness arises entirely from the complex arrangement of physical particles in the brain. This theory suggests that once we fully understand the brain's mechanics, consciousness will no longer seem mysterious. It will be revealed as simply what happens when matter organizes itself in sufficiently complex ways. Modern materialists point to evidence showing that changes in brain chemistry directly alter consciousness, from anesthesia eliminating awareness to antidepressants shifting mood. If consciousness were separate from matter, they argue, physical interventions shouldn't affect it so predictably. This view transforms consciousness from a spiritual mystery into a scientific problem that can eventually be solved through better understanding of neural mechanisms. 24. Idealism, reality as mind. George Berkeley proposed one of philosophy's most startling theories. Matter doesn't exist at all. Only minds and their ideas are real. In his idealist philosophy, what we call the physical world is actually a collection of perceptions in consciousness. The tree in the forest, the chair you're sitting on, even your own body are all ideas in mind, rather than independent material objects. Berkeley famously argued that to be is to be perceived. This doesn't mean reality is an illusion, but rather that reality is fundamentally mental in nature. God's infinite mind ensures that objects continue to exist even when no human is observing them. While this seems counterintuitive, some modern physicists have noted similarities between idealism and quantum mechanics, where observation appears to play a fundamental role in determining physical reality. Idealism suggests that consciousness isn't produced by the brain. Instead, everything we call brain and body are patterns within consciousness itself. 25. Behaviorism, ignoring inner life. In the early 1900s, psychologists like John Watson declared that consciousness couldn't be studied scientifically because inner experiences are private and unverifiable. Behaviorism argued that psychology should focus only on observable behaviors, what people do rather than what they think or feel. B.F. Skinner later developed this into a complete theory suggesting that consciousness might not even exist as commonly understood. From this perspective, what we call consciousness is simply the brain talking to itself about its own processes, with no special inner theater of experience. Behaviorists focused on understanding how environmental stimuli trigger behavioral responses, treating the mind as a black box that doesn't need to be opened to understand human nature. While this approach led to important discoveries about learning and conditioning, it eventually fell out of favor because it seemed to ignore the most obvious fact about human existence, that we have rich inner experiences that feel real and meaningful. 26. Structuralism, breaking down mental elements. Wilhelm Wundt established the first psychology laboratory in 1879 and created structuralism, the attempt to map consciousness by breaking it down into its basic elements. Like chemists analyzing compounds into individual atoms, structuralists used careful introspection to identify the fundamental components of mental experience. They distinguished between sensations, basic perceptions, feelings, emotional tones, and images, memories and imagination, then studied how these combine to create complex conscious experiences. Edward Titchener refined this approach, training subjects to observe their own mental processes with scientific precision. Structuralists discovered that consciousness has a granular quality. It's composed of many separate elements that bind together so seamlessly we usually don't notice the components. While their methods were later criticized as too subjective, structuralism established the important principle that consciousness has an internal structure that can be systematically studied and understood. 27th. Functionalism, what consciousness does. William James criticized structuralism for missing the forest for the trees. Instead of asking what consciousness is made of, functionalism asks what consciousness does, what purpose it serves in helping organisms survive and thrive. James argued that consciousness evolved because it provides adaptive advantages, helping creatures navigate complex environments that simple reflexes couldn't handle. Consciousness allows for flexible responses, learning from experience, and planning for future challenges. This functional approach sees consciousness not as a thing, but as a process, the ongoing activity of adapting to environmental demands. Modern functionalists suggest that consciousness could theoretically exist in any system that performs the right functions, whether biological brains, computer programs, or alien minds. What matters isn't the specific material implementation, but the patterns of information processing that consciousness accomplishes. This perspective has influenced artificial intelligence research and contemporary theories about machine consciousness. 28th, introspection. The method of introspection, carefully observing one's own mental processes, was psychology's first scientific tool for studying consciousness. Researchers trained themselves to notice subtle aspects of their inner experience, from the precise quality of different colors to the emotional tone that accompanies various thoughts. Introspection revealed that consciousness has layers of complexity usually invisible to casual self-observation. For example, introspectionists discovered that every sensation comes with a distinctive feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and that thoughts often arrive with a sense of familiarity or strangeness. They mapped how attention can be divided or focused, and how memories have different textures than perceptions. While introspection was later criticized for being too subjective and unreliable, it remains an important source of data about consciousness. Modern neuroscientists increasingly recognize that understanding consciousness requires combining objective brain measurements with careful subjective reports about inner experience. 29th, emergentism. As scientists studied complex systems, they developed the theory of emergentism, the idea that consciousness emerges from brain activity the way wetness emerges from water molecules. No individual neuron is conscious, but when billions of neurons interact in the right patterns, consciousness spontaneously appears as an emergent property of the system. This is similar to how flocks of birds create complex patterns without any central coordinator. The patterns emerge from simple interactions between individual birds. Emergentism suggests that consciousness isn't located in any specific brain region, but arises from the dynamic interactions throughout neural networks. The theory explains why consciousness seems both dependent on the brain, damaged neurons, and consciousness changes, yet somehow more than just neural activity. Subjective experience feels qualitatively different from electrical impulses. Modern complexity scientists study how emergence works in various systems, from ant colonies to weather patterns, providing insights into how consciousness might emerge from the brain's intricate neural dance. 30. Psychophysics Beginnings. Gustav Fechner pioneered psychophysics in the 1860s, the systematic study of how physical stimuli relate to conscious experiences. His careful experiments revealed mathematical relationships between the intensity of physical stimuli and the strength of subjective sensations. For example, doubling the brightness of a light doesn't double the perceived brightness. The relationship follows a logarithmic curve. These discoveries showed that consciousness doesn't simply mirror the physical world, but transforms sensory information according to specific laws. Weber's law and Fechner's law described these transformations with mathematical precision, making consciousness amenable to scientific measurement for the first time. Psychophysics established that subjective experiences could be studied objectively, laying groundwork for modern neuroscience. The field revealed that consciousness actively constructs our perceived reality from raw sensory data, rather than passively receiving information from the environment. This insight continues to influence how scientists understand perception, attention, and the relationship between brain and mind. These early scientific approaches transformed consciousness from a philosophical puzzle into a research program. Each theory contributed pieces to the larger puzzle of understanding how awareness works, setting the stage for modern neuroscience discoveries that continue today. Chapter 4. The Brain and Biology. The 20th century brought powerful new tools for exploring consciousness. Microscopes that could see individual brain cells, electrodes that could measure neural activity, and brain scanners that could watch thoughts in real time. Scientists discovered that consciousness isn't magic, but emerges from the intricate biological machinery inside your skull. Let's journey through the neural landscape where awareness is born. 31st, neurons as the seat of consciousness. Santiago Ramón y Cajal's microscopic studies in the early 1900s revealed that the brain consists of billions of individual cells called neurons, each one a tiny biological computer. These neurons communicate through electrical impulses and chemical signals, creating vast networks of information processing. The neuron doctrine suggests that consciousness emerges from the collective activity of these neural networks, with each thought, memory, and sensation corresponding to specific patterns of neuronal firing. Modern neuroscientists can now record from individual neurons and watch them respond to conscious experiences. Some neurons fire only when you're aware of a red object, others when you recognize a face. This cellular approach to consciousness suggests that your subjective experiences are literally the felt sense of neurons talking to each other. When you see a sunset or remember a childhood moment, specific populations of neurons are creating those experiences through their coordinated electrical activity. 32nd neural correlates of consciousness. Neuroscientist Christoph Koch pioneered the search for neural correlates of consciousness, NCCs, the minimum brain activity required for specific conscious experiences. By comparing brain activity when people are conscious versus unconscious of the same stimulus, researchers can identify which neural processes are truly necessary for awareness. For example, when a word is flashed too quickly to consciously perceive, it still triggers activity in early visual areas, but conscious recognition requires additional activation in higher brain regions. These studies reveal that consciousness isn't an all-or-nothing phenomenon, but emerges gradually as information spreads through specific neural pathways. Different aspects of consciousness, visual awareness, emotional feelings, self-recognition, have distinct neural correlates scattered throughout the brain. This research suggests that consciousness is like an orchestra, with different brain regions contributing their own instruments to create the symphony of subjective experience. 33rd Brain Hemispheres Theory. Roger Sperry's Nobel Prize-winning studies of split-brain patients revealed that consciousness might not be as unified as it feels. When the connection between brain hemispheres is severed to treat severe epilepsy, patients sometimes develop two separate streams of consciousness. The left hemisphere, aware of different information than the right. The left brain typically handles language and logical reasoning, while the right brain processes spatial relationships and emotional context. In healthy brains, these hemispheres constantly communicate, creating our sense of unified awareness. However, the split brain studies suggest that consciousness might normally consist of multiple parallel processes that usually work together so seamlessly we don't notice the division. This hemispheric specialization helps explain why consciousness can feel both unified and multifaceted. Different brain regions contribute different types of awareness that merge into a single subjective experience. 34th brainstem as consciousness switch. The brainstem, that ancient core of neural tissue connecting your brain to spinal cord, contains the fundamental switch that turns consciousness on and off. When the brainstem is severely damaged, patients fall into comas, regardless of how healthy the rest of their brain remains. The brainstem contains circuits that regulate sleep-wake cycles, maintaining the basic arousal necessary for any conscious experience. Antonio Damasio and other researchers argue that the brainstem also generates the primordial sense of being alive, the basic feeling of existing as a biological organism. This includes monitoring your heartbeat, breathing, and internal bodily states, creating what Damasio calls core consciousness. Without the brainstem's regulatory functions, the higher brain regions that process thoughts and perceptions cannot maintain conscious awareness. This ancient part of your brain, shared with reptiles and other simple vertebrates, provides the biological foundation upon which all more complex forms of consciousness are built. 35th, cortical loops. The cerebral cortex, your brain's wrinkled outer layer, creates consciousness through intricate loops of neural activity. Gerald Edelman's theory describes how different cortical areas constantly communicate with each other, creating reentrant loops where information cycles back and forth rather than flowing in one direction. These cortical loops integrate information from different senses, memories, and cognitive processes into unified conscious experiences. For example, recognizing your mother's face requires loops connecting visual areas that process facial features, memory areas that store information about her, and emotional areas that generate feelings of familiarity and love. The constant circulation of information through these loops creates the continuity of consciousness. Each moment of awareness builds on previous moments while influencing future ones. Disrupting these loops through anesthesia or brain damage fragments consciousness, suggesting that the dynamic circulation of information throughout the cortex is essential for maintaining unified subjective experience. 36th, reticular activating system. Deep within your brainstem lies a network called the Reticular Activating System, RAS, which acts like consciousness's volume control. This system determines what information from your environment reaches conscious awareness and what remains in the background. The RAS explains why you suddenly notice red cars everywhere after deciding to buy one, or why you can sleep through traffic noise but wake instantly to your baby's cry. This neural network filters the overwhelming flood of sensory information, allowing only potentially important stimuli to reach consciousness. The RAS also regulates levels of alertness throughout the day, from the drowsy awareness of early morning to the sharp focus needed for challenging tasks. Researchers studying attention disorders have found that problems with the RAS can cause difficulties maintaining focused consciousness. This system demonstrates that consciousness is actively constructed rather than passively received. Your brain constantly chooses what deserves awareness based on relevance, novelty, and personal significance. 37. The role of the thalamus. The thalamus, a walnut-sized structure deep in your brain, serves as consciousness's relay station and conductor. Nearly all sensory information passes through the thalamus before reaching the cortex, and the thalamus actively shapes what becomes conscious by amplifying some signals while suppressing others. Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA structure, spent his later years studying how thalamic circuits create conscious awareness. He discovered that the thalamus doesn't just relay information, but actively binds different types of sensory data together, coordinating the visual, auditory, and tactile aspects of experience into unified conscious perceptions. During deep sleep, thalamic activity decreases dramatically, effectively disconnecting the cortex from sensory input and eliminating consciousness. Some researchers propose that the thalamus generates the basic rhythm of conscious experience, creating discrete moments of awareness that feel continuous but are actually composed of separate neural events occurring 40 times per second. 38th, the global brain network. Modern brain imaging reveals that consciousness emerges from a global network spanning multiple brain regions rather than being localized in any single area. Stanislas Dehaene's global workspace theory describes how information becomes conscious when it spreads throughout this distributed network, making it globally available to different brain systems. Initially, sensory information is processed unconsciously in specialized brain modules. But when a stimulus becomes important enough, it triggers global ignition, a wave of neural activity that broadcasts the information throughout the brain network. This global broadcasting is what transforms unconscious neural processing into conscious awareness. The network includes prefrontal regions for executive control, parietal areas for attention, and temporal regions for memory integration. Brain disorders that disconnect parts of this network can cause specific deficits in consciousness while leaving other aspects intact, supporting the idea that different components contribute to the overall conscious experience. 39th, plasticity and awareness. Your brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself, called neuroplasticity, shapes consciousness throughout your lifetime. When blind individuals learn Braille, their visual cortex gets recruited for processing touch sensations. London taxi drivers develop enlarged hippocampi from navigating the city's complex streets. These changes in brain structure directly alter conscious experience. What you can perceive, remember, and think about depends on how your neural networks have been sculpted by experience. Meditation training can thicken brain regions associated with attention and emotional regulation, literally changing the texture of consciousness. Brain plasticity also enables recovery after injury, with remaining neurons taking over functions from damaged areas. This biological flexibility suggests that consciousness is not fixed, but continuously evolving based on how you use your brain. Every new skill learned, every memory formed, every habit developed physically rewires the neural foundations of your awareness, making consciousness both stable enough for continuity and flexible enough for growth. 40th, evolutionary brain expansion. The human brain tripled in size over the past 2 million years, with much of this expansion occurring in regions associated with consciousness. The prefrontal cortex, crucial for self-awareness and complex reasoning, is proportionally much larger in humans than in other primates. This evolutionary expansion corresponds with the emergence of sophisticated conscious abilities like language, abstract thinking, and awareness of one's own mental processes. Evolutionary neuroscientists propose that consciousness provided survival advantages by enabling flexible responses to novel challenges, social cooperation through shared mental models, and the ability to simulate future scenarios. The expansion wasn't just in brain size, but in the complexity of connections between different brain regions, allowing for more sophisticated integration of information. Some researchers suggest that human consciousness represents a phased transition in evolution, a qualitatively new form of information processing that emerged when brain networks reached sufficient complexity and interconnectedness to support recursive self-awareness and symbolic thought. These biological discoveries reveal that consciousness emerges from your brain's intricate neural architecture. As you rest tonight, these same networks that scientists study continue their quiet work, weaving together the fabric of your awareness even as you drift towards sleep. Chapter 5. Information and Computation. As computers transform the modern world, scientists began wondering, could consciousness itself be a form of computation? These information-based theories propose that awareness emerges not from any specific biological material, but from patterns of information processing that could theoretically occur in brains, computers, or even alien minds. Let's explore how consciousness might be nature's most sophisticated information system. 41st. Consciousness as information processing. Claude Shannon's information theory in the 1940s provided a mathematical framework for understanding how complex systems process and transform information. Cognitive scientists began viewing consciousness as the brain's way of integrating vast amounts of sensory data, memories, and internal states into coherent, actionable information. This processing isn't passive reception, but active construction. Your brain constantly combines incomplete sensory signals with stored knowledge to create your experienced reality. When you recognize a friend's voice on a noisy phone line, consciousness is performing sophisticated information processing that fills in missing details and resolves ambiguities. Modern neuroscientists measure consciousness by examining how much information different brain regions share with each other. During anesthesia, information flow decreases dramatically even though individual neurons remain active, suggesting that consciousness requires not just neural activity, but coordinated information integration across multiple brain systems. 42nd Integrated Information Theory, IIT. Neuroscientist Giulio Tononi developed one of the most mathematically rigorous theories of consciousness, Integrated Information Theory. IIT proposes that consciousness corresponds to integrated information, the amount of information generated by a system above and beyond its individual parts. A conscious system must be both differentiated, able to distinguish many different states, and integrated, unified rather than fragmented. Tononi's theory provides a precise mathematical measure, called phi, that quantifies how much consciousness any system possesses. Surprisingly, IIT suggests that some simple networks might be more conscious than complex but poorly integrated systems. The theory even implies that certain arrangements of matter, like specific crystal structures, could possess minimal consciousness. While controversial, IIT offers testable predictions about consciousness and has influenced the development of clinical tools for measuring awareness in unresponsive patients. The theory transforms consciousness from a mystery into a measurable property of information processing systems. 43rd, Computational Theory of Mind. The computational theory of mind, developed by philosophers like Jerry Fodor and Hilary Putnam, proposes that thinking is literally a form of computation. Just as computers manipulate symbols according to rules, consciousness involves the brain manipulating mental representations through cognitive processes. This theory suggests that what matters for consciousness isn't the specific biological hardware, but the software, the patterns of information transformation that could theoretically run on any sufficiently complex computational system. Mental states are defined by their computational role rather than their physical substrate, meaning that artificial consciousness is theoretically possible. The theory explains how consciousness can be both causally effective, thoughts can influence behavior, and systematic, similar thoughts behave similarly across different contexts. Critics argue that computation alone cannot explain the subjective, qualitative aspects of consciousness, why there's something it feels like to experience red or taste coffee, rather than just processing information about wavelengths or chemical compounds. 44th, Consciousness as Algorithm. Some theorists propose that consciousness is essentially an algorithm, a step-by-step procedure for processing information and generating appropriate responses. Douglas Hofstadter suggests that consciousness emerges from self-referential loops in these algorithms, where the system processes information about its own processing. This creates recursive awareness, consciousness knowing that it's conscious. The algorithmic view explains why consciousness feels like a continuous process of analysis, decision-making, and response generation. It also suggests that consciousness could be replicated in artificial systems by implementing the right algorithms, regardless of whether those systems are made of biological neurons or silicon circuits. Recent advances in artificial intelligence, particularly large language models, have renewed interest in algorithmic theories of consciousness. These AI systems demonstrate sophisticated information processing that sometimes resembles conscious reasoning, raising questions about whether implementing sufficiently complex algorithms might actually create artificial consciousness rather than just simulating it. 45th Pattern Recognition Model. Consciousness might be primarily a sophisticated pattern recognition system that identifies meaningful regularities in the flood of information flowing through your brain. This model suggests that awareness emerges from the brain's ability to detect patterns across different types of information, recognizing faces in visual data, melodies in sounds, emotions in social interactions, and abstract concepts in language. Jeff Hawkins, founder of Palm Computing, developed a theory proposing that consciousness is fundamentally about prediction through pattern recognition. Your brain constantly compares incoming sensory information with stored patterns, predicting what should happen next and updating its models when predictions fail. This pattern recognition operates at multiple levels simultaneously, from recognizing individual features to understanding complex social situations. The model explains why consciousness excels at finding meaning and significance. It's constantly searching for patterns that connect current experience with past learning, creating the sense that conscious experience is inherently meaningful rather than just random neural activity. 46. Neural coding hypothesis. How does the brain's electrical activity create conscious experience? The neural coding hypothesis suggests that consciousness emerges from specific patterns in how neurons encode information. Different coding schemes have been proposed: rate coding, how fast neurons fire; temporal coding, the precise timing of neural spikes; and population coding, patterns across groups of neurons. Some researchers focus on gamma wave synchronization, when different brain regions oscillate together at around 40 Hz, creating temporal windows for conscious experience. Others investigate sparse coding, where consciousness emerges when only a few neurons are active at any given moment, creating efficient representations of complex information. The binding problem, how the brain combines information from different senses and brain regions into unified conscious experiences, might be solved through synchronized neural oscillations that temporarily link different processing areas. Understanding neural coding could eventually allow scientists to decode thoughts directly from brain activity and potentially even upload or download conscious experiences. 47th. Consciousness as simulation. One of the most intriguing theories proposes that consciousness is essentially a detailed simulation that your brain creates of both yourself and your environment. Andy Clark and other philosophers describe consciousness as the brain's best guess about reality, constructed from sensory data, memories, and predictions. This simulation is so sophisticated and constantly updated that it feels like direct contact with reality, but it's actually a mental model. The simulation includes a model of yourself as an agent moving through the world, which creates self-awareness and the sense of being the subject of experiences. This theory explains phenomena like phantom limb syndrome, where amputees continue to feel missing limbs because their brain's body simulation hasn't updated. It also accounts for how psychedelic drugs can dramatically alter consciousness by disrupting the brain's simulation processes. Virtual reality researchers study how immersive simulations can fool consciousness, providing insights into how the brain's own simulation systems work. 48th. Virtual machine theory. Computer scientist Daniel Dennett proposes that consciousness is like software running on the brain's hardware, a virtual machine implemented in neural circuitry. Just as your computer can run different programs on the same physical components, consciousness is a particular type of program that the brain executes. This virtual machine creates a narrative center of gravity, the sense that there's someone experiencing your mental life. Unlike a literal person inside your head, this self is more like a persistent pattern in the brain's information processing, similar to how software programs persist, even though the underlying hardware is constantly changing. The virtual machine theory explains why consciousness feels unified and continuous, despite being implemented by billions of separate neurons. It also suggests that consciousness could potentially be transferred between different physical substrates, just as software can run on different computers. This computational approach treats consciousness as an emergent property of information processing, rather than something requiring specific biological materials. 49th. Brain as predictive processor. Neuroscientist Anil Seth and others propose that consciousness is fundamentally about prediction. Your brain constantly generates models of what will happen next and updates these models based on incoming sensory information. Rather than passively receiving reality, consciousness actively constructs your experience world through predictive processing. Your brain combines top-down predictions with bottom-up sensory data, and consciousness emerges from this predictive modeling process. When predictions match reality, you experience smooth, effortless awareness. When predictions fail, consciousness updates its models, creating the sense of surprise or learning something new. This theory explains why consciousness is so good at filling in missing information. Your brain's predictive models automatically complete partial sensory data. It also accounts for phenomena like the placebo effect, where conscious expectations can influence physical experiences. The predictive processing framework suggests that consciousness isn't just aware of the world, but actively creates the experience world through sophisticated predictive modeling. 50. The mind as computer metaphor. The computer metaphor for consciousness has profoundly influenced modern thinking about the mind. This metaphor suggests that the brain processes information like a computer, with inputs from the senses, processing in neural networks, memory storage and retrieval, and behavioral outputs. Consciousness emerges from the brain's information processing activities, similar to how computer programs create complex behaviors from simple computational operations. The metaphor has been enormously productive, inspiring research into artificial intelligence, neural networks, and computational models of cognition. However, critics argue that consciousness involves qualities like subjective experience and intentionality that don't have clear computational analogues. The brain also differs from computers in important ways. It's analog rather than digital, massively parallel rather than serial, and constantly rewiring itself through experience. Despite these limitations, the computer metaphor continues to provide useful frameworks for understanding how consciousness might emerge from complex information processing, while raising profound questions about whether artificial systems could ever truly replicate the full richness of conscious experience. These computational theories suggest that consciousness might be substrate independent, a pattern of information processing that could theoretically arise in any sufficiently complex system. As you drift towards sleep, consider that your own awareness might be nature's most elegant computational achievement. Chapter 6. Philosophical Puzzles. Some mysteries about consciousness run so deep that they've puzzled philosophers for centuries and continue to challenge our best scientific minds today. These aren't just abstract puzzles, but fundamental questions about the nature of your own experience. As we explore these philosophical riddles, let each one illuminate a different facet of the profound mystery of being aware. 51. The hard problem of consciousness. Philosopher David Chalmers identified what he calls the hard problem of consciousness, explaining why there's something it feels like to have experiences rather than just processing information unconsciously. Science has made remarkable progress on the easy problems of consciousness, explaining how we process information, respond to stimuli, and exhibit intelligent behavior. But the hard problem asks why these processes are accompanied by subjective experience at all. Why does seeing red feel like something rather than just being a neural response to certain wavelengths of light? Even if we completely map every neural process in the brain, Chalmers argues, we still wouldn't know why those processes create the felt quality of experience. This problem highlights the explanatory gap between objective brain processes and subjective consciousness. Some philosophers argue the hard problem reveals fundamental limitations in materialist approaches to consciousness, while others believe it will eventually dissolve as neuroscience advances. 52nd Qualia Theory. Qualia are the intrinsic, subjective qualities of conscious experiences, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the taste of chocolate. These qualitative aspects of consciousness seem irreducible to physical descriptions. No amount of objective information about wavelengths of light can capture what it's actually like to experience the color red. Philosopher Frank Jackson argued that qualia represent knowledge that can only be gained through direct conscious experience, not through scientific study. The theory of qualia suggests that consciousness contains non-physical properties that cannot be captured by purely objective science. Critics argue that qualia are illusions created by the brain's information processing, while defenders insist they represent the most undeniable aspect of reality, the immediate qualitative nature of your own experience right now. The debate over qualia touches on deep questions about whether consciousness can ever be fully explained by physical science, or whether it requires fundamentally new conceptual frameworks. 53rd. Mary's Room Thought Experiment. Philosopher Frank Jackson created one of philosophy's most famous thought experiments about consciousness. Mary is a brilliant scientist who knows everything physical about color, but has been raised in a black and white room and has never seen colors directly. When Mary finally leaves the room and sees red for the first time, does she learn something new? Jackson initially argued that she would learn new facts about what it's like to experience red, proving that consciousness involves non-physical properties, qualia, that cannot be captured by physical science. The thought experiment suggests that there's a fundamental difference between knowing about consciousness objectively and experiencing it subjectively. Critics have proposed various responses. Maybe Mary wouldn't actually learn anything new, or maybe the new knowledge is just the same physical facts presented in a new way. The Mary's Room experiment continues to generate philosophical debate about whether subjective experience contains irreducible properties that science cannot fully capture. 54. The philosophical zombie idea. Imagine a being physically and behaviorally identical to you in every way, same brain, same responses, same apparent intelligence, but with no inner experience whatsoever. This philosophical zombie would act conscious, but have no subjective awareness, no inner life, no qualia. Philosopher David Chalmers argues that such zombies are conceivable, which suggests that consciousness is not logically reducible to physical processes. If zombies are possible, then consciousness involves something beyond mere physical arrangement of matter. Critics argue that zombies are not genuinely conceivable, or that conceivability doesn't imply real possibility. The zombie argument highlights a deep tension in consciousness studies. If consciousness is entirely physical, why does it seem conceivable that all the physical processes could occur without subjective experience? This thought experiment probes whether consciousness is necessarily connected to its physical implementation, or whether subjective experience represents something additional to physical processes. 55th. Panpsychism. One of the most radical solutions to consciousness puzzles is panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality, present in all matter. Rather than emerging only in complex systems like brains, consciousness exists at the most basic level of physical reality. Electrons, atoms, and rocks would all possess some form of primitive experience, though vastly simpler than human consciousness. Philosopher Galen Strawson argues that panpsychism is the most logical solution to the hard problem, since it's difficult to explain how consciousness could emerge from purely non-conscious matter. Contemporary philosophers like Philip Goff and Christoph Koch have developed sophisticated versions of panpsychism that avoid some traditional objections. The theory suggests that complex consciousness results from the combination of simpler conscious experiences, similar to how complex chemistry emerges from simpler atomic interactions. While counterintuitive, panpsychism offers a potential solution to the mystery of how consciousness fits into the physical world. 56th. Solipsism. Solipsism presents the most radical skeptical position about consciousness. Only your own mind definitely exists, and everything else, other people, the external world, even your own body, might be illusions created by your consciousness. Since you can only directly access your own subjective experience, you have no absolute proof that other minds exist or that there's a world beyond your awareness. This position emerges naturally from careful reflection on what you can know with certainty. While few philosophers seriously advocate solipsism, it highlights important epistemological problems about consciousness. How can you know that other people are conscious rather than sophisticated unconscious machines? How can you prove that your perceptions correspond to an external reality rather than being elaborate hallucinations? Solipsism forces us to confront the fundamental privacy of consciousness and the difficulty of moving from subjective experience to knowledge about the wider world. Though practically untenable, solipsism illuminates the unique epistemic situation of consciousness. 57th, dual aspect monism. Dual aspect monism, advocated by philosophers like Bertrand Russell and more recently Philip Goff, proposes that consciousness and physical reality are two aspects of the same underlying substance. Rather than consciousness emerging from matter or matter being reducible to mind, both are manifestations of something more fundamental. This view suggests that physics describes the structural and relational properties of reality, but remains silent about its intrinsic nature. Consciousness might be what physical reality is like from the inside, while physics describes what it's like from the outside. This elegant solution avoids the interaction problems that plague dualism while preserving the reality of consciousness. The theory aligns with insights from physics, showing that we only know matter through its effects and relationships, never its intrinsic nature. Dual aspect monism suggests that the intrinsic nature of physical reality just is consciousness or proto-consciousness, making mind-matter unity a fundamental feature of existence rather than an emergent accident. 58th, epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenalism proposes that consciousness is a byproduct of brain activity that has no causal power of its own. Like steam rising from a locomotive, consciousness emerges from neural processes but doesn't influence them. This theory attempts to preserve both the reality of consciousness and the causal closure of physics, the idea that physical events have only physical causes. Your subjective experiences are real but powerless, created by brain activity without affecting behavior or decision-making. The theory explains why consciousness seems to accompany complex information processing, while avoiding the problem of how non-physical mind could influence physical brain. However, epiphenomenalism faces the troubling implication that consciousness is causally irrelevant. Your decisions are made by unconscious brain processes, with conscious experience being an impotent observer. Critics argue this makes consciousness evolutionarily pointless and conflicts with the intuitive sense that consciousness guides behavior and decision-making. 59. Consciousness as illusion. Some philosophers and scientists argue that consciousness, as commonly understood, doesn't actually exist. It's an illusion created by the brain's information processing systems. Keith Frankish, Daniel Dennett, and others propose that what we call consciousness is really just sophisticated unconscious processing that creates the false impression of inner experience. There are no qualia, no subjective experiences, no what it's like to be conscious, just complex information processing that includes self-monitoring and reporting mechanisms. The illusion arises because these systems create internal models that represent the existence of a conscious observer, but there's no actual observer beyond the modeling process itself. This eliminativist approach dissolves the hard problem by denying that there's anything hard to explain. Critics argue that this theory commits the ultimate philosophical error, denying the reality of the one thing we know most directly, our own conscious experience. The debate over consciousness as illusion touches on fundamental questions about the relationship between scientific explanation and phenomenological reality. 60th. Emergence versus reductionism. The tension between emergentism and reductionism represents one of the deepest divides in consciousness studies. Reductionists argue that consciousness will ultimately be explained by reducing it to simpler physical processes, neurons, molecules, and quantum mechanics. Once we understand these underlying mechanisms completely, consciousness will lose its mystery. Emergentists contend that consciousness represents a genuinely new level of reality that emerges from but cannot be reduced to neural activity. Like wetness emerging from H2O molecules, or life emerging from chemistry, consciousness might be an emergent property that requires new concepts and explanations. Strong emergence suggests that consciousness has causal powers not present in its physical constituents, while weak emergence sees it as simply a useful higher-level description. This debate reflects deeper questions about whether the universe has genuine levels of organization or whether everything reduces to fundamental physics. The answer shapes whether consciousness requires revolutionary new science or will eventually be explained by existing physical frameworks. These philosophical puzzles remind us that consciousness remains one of existence's deepest mysteries. Each paradox and thought experiment reveals different aspects of the profound enigma of your own awareness, inviting continued wonder as you drift toward the mystery of sleep. Chapter 7: Psychology and the Self. Psychology revealed that consciousness isn't a single, unified spotlight, but a complex theater with multiple actors, hidden depths, and alternative states. These discoveries shattered the illusion of a simple, continuous self and revealed consciousness as a dynamic, multifaceted phenomenon that shifts and changes throughout your mental life. Let's explore the psychological landscapes that exist within your own awareness. 61. Freud's unconscious. Sigmund Freud revolutionized thinking about consciousness by proposing that most mental life occurs outside awareness. His unconscious mind contains repressed memories, forbidden desires, and automatic processes that powerfully influence conscious experience without your knowledge. Freud described consciousness as the tip of an iceberg, with vast unconscious depths hidden beneath the surface. The unconscious doesn't just store forgotten information, it actively processes experiences, solves problems, and generates emotions that bubble up into consciousness. Dreams, slips of the tongue, and neurotic symptoms reveal the unconscious mind's constant activity. Modern neuroscience has validated many of Freud's insights, showing that unconscious processing influences everything from first impressions to complex decisions. Brain imaging reveals extensive unconscious neural activity that shapes conscious experience. While Freud's specific theories about sexual repression and childhood trauma remain controversial, his fundamental insight that consciousness represents only a small fraction of mental activity has become a cornerstone of psychological understanding. 62nd, Jung's collective unconscious. Carl Jung expanded Freud's unconscious to include inherited psychological patterns shared by all humanity. The collective unconscious contains archetypes, universal symbols and themes that appear across cultures in myths, dreams, and art. These archetypal patterns, like the hero, the mother, and the shadow, shape how you perceive and respond to fundamental life situations. Jung argued that consciousness emerges from this deeper collective layer, connecting individual awareness to humanity's shared psychological heritage. The collective unconscious explains why certain symbols and stories resonate across different cultures and historical periods. It also accounts for the profound meaning people often find in synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that seem to reveal hidden connections in experience. Modern research on universal cognitive biases, cross-cultural similarities in emotional expression, and shared patterns in storytelling provides some support for Jung's insights. The theory suggests that your individual consciousness is rooted in humanity's collective psychological evolution, making awareness both personal and transpersonal. 63rd, Ego theory. The ego theory, developed through psychoanalysis and later refined by cognitive psychology, proposes that consciousness is organized around a central executive self, the ego, that coordinates mental activity and maintains personal identity. This ego serves as the narrator of your life story, integrating memories, managing relationships with others, and making decisions based on learned patterns and goals. The ego creates continuity of identity across time, allowing you to feel like the same person despite constant changes in thoughts, emotions, and circumstances. It also mediates between unconscious drives and social expectations, creating the conscious self that interacts with the world. Modern neuroscience has identified brain networks that might correspond to ego functions, particularly the default mode network that activates when you're thinking about yourself and your place in social relationships. However, the ego theory faces challenges from research showing that the sense of unified self can be disrupted by brain damage, meditation, or psychedelic experiences, suggesting that the ego might be more constructed than fundamental. 64th Bundle Theory of Self. Philosopher David Hume and later Buddhist psychology challenged ego theory by proposing that the self is actually a bundle of experiences with no central observer. When you introspect carefully, Hume argued, you find only a stream of thoughts, sensations, and emotions, never a substantial self that has these experiences. The sense of being a unified self emerges from memory connecting these separate mental events into a coherent narrative. This bundle theory suggests that consciousness is more like a river than a lake, a flow of experiences without a permanent container. Buddhist meditation practices often lead to direct realization of this no-self insight, where practitioners discover that the sense of being a separate observer dissolves into pure awareness without a center. Modern neuroscience supports aspects of bundle theory by showing that the sense of self depends on the integration of multiple brain systems rather than a single self-center. The theory explains why the sense of self can vary dramatically across different states of consciousness and why some people report selfless experiences during deep meditation. 65th Multiple Drafts Model. Daniel Dennett's multiple drafts model proposes that consciousness doesn't occur in a single location or moment, but consists of multiple parallel processes that create competing drafts of experience. Rather than a central theater where everything comes together for a unified conscious experience, your brain generates multiple interpretations of incoming information simultaneously. These drafts compete for control of behavior and memory formation, with consciousness being the collection of drafts that happen to influence your actions and reports at any given moment. There's no single moment when information becomes conscious. Instead, different aspects of experience become conscious at different times and to different degrees. This model explains many puzzling features of consciousness, like change blindness, failing to notice large changes in your visual field, and the gradual way that ambiguous perceptions can shift between different interpretations. The multiple drafts model eliminates the need for a central observer, instead describing consciousness as a distributed process of parallel information processing and competition between different interpretations of reality. 66. Split brain insights. Studies of split brain patients whose corpus callosum has been severed to treat epilepsy revealed that consciousness might normally consist of multiple parallel streams that usually communicate seamlessly. When the connection between brain hemispheres is cut, patients sometimes display two separate streams of consciousness with different capabilities and knowledge. The left hemisphere typically controls language and logical reasoning, while the right hemisphere excels at spatial processing and emotional recognition. In some experiments, the two hemispheres appear to have different opinions, preferences, and even conflicting goals. These findings suggest that normal consciousness might involve constant communication and negotiation between multiple conscious systems rather than a single unified awareness. The split brain studies also revealed that the left hemisphere acts as an interpreter, constantly creating explanations for experiences even when those explanations are demonstrably false. This discovery implies that much of what we consider rational consciousness might actually be post hoc storytelling rather than genuine understanding of our own mental processes. 67th. Subliminal Perception. Research on subliminal perception reveals that consciousness processes information that never reaches awareness. Stimuli presented too briefly or weakly to be consciously perceived can still influence emotions, judgments, and behavior. People shown happy or angry faces for just milliseconds report different moods, even though they can't identify what they saw. Subliminal primes can influence word recognition, social judgments, and even consumer preferences. This research demonstrates that consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Some information receives full conscious attention, while other information influences mental processes unconsciously. The boundary between conscious and unconscious perception appears fluid rather than sharp, with some information existing in twilight states of partial awareness. Modern neuroscience shows that subliminal stimuli can activate the same brain regions as conscious perceptions, but with weaker or more limited patterns of activity. These findings suggest that consciousness might be better understood as a continuum of awareness rather than an all-or-nothing phenomenon. 68th. Dream consciousness. Dream consciousness offers a unique window into how awareness can function when disconnected from external sensory input. During REM sleep, the brain generates vivid conscious experiences using only internally generated activity. Dream consciousness differs from waking awareness in fascinating ways. Logical reasoning often fails, impossible events seem normal, and personal identity can be fluid or fragmented. Yet dreams can feel completely real while occurring, suggesting that consciousness doesn't require external validation to create compelling subjective experiences. Research shows that dreaming involves many of the same brain networks as waking consciousness, but with altered patterns of activity and connectivity. The study of lucid dreaming, where people become conscious that they're dreaming while still in the dream state, reveals that different levels of self-awareness can coexist within the same conscious experience. Dream consciousness demonstrates the brain's remarkable ability to construct complex experiential realities from internal resources alone, offering insights into the constructive nature of all conscious experience. 69th. Altered states. Meditation trance. Meditation, trance states, and other altered states of consciousness reveal that awareness can be dramatically reconfigured through specific practices and techniques. Deep meditation can lead to states where the sense of self dissolves, time perception changes, and awareness becomes pure and contentless. Shamanic trance states often involve experiences of traveling to other realms or communicating with non-physical entities. These altered states aren't just curiosities, but offer insights into the flexibility and range of human consciousness. Neuroscience research on meditation shows measurable changes in brain activity and structure, including increased activity in attention networks and decreased activity in the default mode network associated with self-referential thinking. Long-term meditators often report fundamental shifts in their understanding of consciousness itself, describing awareness as more spacious, peaceful, and interconnected than ordinary waking consciousness. These practices suggest that the boundaries and characteristics of normal consciousness can be systematically modified through training and practice. 70. Flow state awareness. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi identified flow states, periods of complete absorption in activity where self-consciousness disappears and performance becomes effortless and optimal. During flow, the boundaries between self and activity dissolve, creating a unified field of consciousness where action and awareness merge. Time perception often changes, with hours feeling like minutes, and there's typically a loss of worry about outcomes or social evaluation. Flow states can occur during sports, creative work, meditation, or any activity that provides clear goals, immediate feedback, and a balance between challenge and skill level. Neuroscience research on flow shows decreased activity in the prefrontal cortex, particularly areas associated with self-criticism and temporal reasoning, a phenomenon called transient hyperfrontality. This suggests that flow consciousness emerges when the brain's executive control systems relax their grip, allowing more automatic and integrated neural networks to take control. Flow states demonstrate that consciousness can operate in radically different modes, sometimes achieving peak performance by getting the self-conscious mind out of the way. These psychological insights reveal consciousness as far more complex and flexible than common sense suggests. Your awareness contains hidden depths, multiple streams, and alternative configurations that continue to surprise researchers and practitioners alike. Chapter 8: Modern Neuroscience and Models. Armed with brain scanners, supercomputers, and mathematical precision, today's scientists are closer than ever to solving consciousness. These modern theories combine rigorous experimentation with sophisticated modeling to reveal how awareness emerges from neural activity. Each breakthrough brings us nearer to understanding the greatest mystery in science, the nature of your own conscious experience. 71st, Global Workspace Theory. Bernard Baars first proposed, and Stanislas Dehaene later refined, the idea that consciousness works like a theater's global lighting system. Most brain processing happens in specialized unconscious modules, like backstage workers handling specific tasks. But when information becomes significant enough, it gets broadcast globally across the entire brain network, illuminating it for all systems to access. This moment of global broadcasting is when unconscious processing becomes conscious experience. Brain scans reveal a dramatic wave of neural activity spreading across cortical regions when people become aware of previously unconscious stimuli. The theory elegantly explains consciousness's unity. Despite being processed by separate brain regions, information feels integrated because it's shared globally. This framework has practical applications, helping doctors assess consciousness in patients and understand how anesthesia works by blocking global neural communication. The workspace model suggests consciousness isn't located anywhere specific, but emerges from brain-wide information sharing. 72nd, Higher Order Thought Theory. David Rosenthal revolutionized consciousness studies by proposing that awareness requires thinking about thinking. A mental state becomes conscious only when accompanied by a higher-order thought that represents it. You don't just see a sunset, you're aware of seeing a sunset because a monitoring system in your brain creates thoughts about your visual experience. This metacognitive layer transforms unconscious neural processing into subjective consciousness. The theory explains the mysterious sense of someone having experiences. The higher-order monitoring creates the feeling of a subject observing mental states. Neuroscience has identified prefrontal cortex regions that perform this self-monitoring function. Brain damage in these areas can eliminate self-awareness while leaving basic perception intact. The approach treats consciousness as sophisticated self-surveillance that evolution developed to help organisms track their own mental processes. This metacognitive perspective suggests that consciousness isn't just processing information, but processing information about information processing, a recursive loop that creates subjective experience. 73rd, Attention Schema Theory. Michael Graziano offers a surprisingly simple solution to consciousness's mystery. It's the brain's model of its own attention. Just as your brain creates body schemas to track limb positions, it constructs attention schemas to monitor mental focus. The schema inevitably represents attention as something non-physical and mysterious, exactly matching how consciousness feels subjectively. When you focus on a red rose, attention networks activate, and the schema models this as a ghostly essence illuminating the rose. The theory suggests consciousness isn't something added to neural processing, but the brain's inevitable conclusion about its attention mechanisms. This schema is necessarily imprecise, like a cartoon version of neural reality, which explains consciousness's mysterious qualities. Any sufficiently complex system monitoring its own attention would conclude it has mysterious inner experiences, even if it's purely computational. The theory predicts that artificial systems with attention schemas would report subjective consciousness. This framework transforms consciousness from an inexplicable phenomenon into a predictable consequence of sophisticated attention modeling. 74. Reentrant Signaling. Gerald Edelman discovered that consciousness emerges from recursive communication loops throughout the brain rather than one-way information flow. Neural signals constantly cycle back and forth between brain regions in reentrant patterns, allowing higher areas to influence lower-level processing, while sensory regions update higher-level interpretations. This creates dynamic circuits where information circulates through multiple brain systems simultaneously. Consciousness emerges from these ongoing feedback loops that bind different aspects of experience, visual, auditory, emotional, and conceptual, into unified perceptions. The theory explains how expectations shape perception and how context influences interpretation. Brain imaging confirms extensive reentrant connectivity, and disrupting these loops fragments conscious experience. Unlike theories focusing on specific brain regions, reentrant signaling treats consciousness as inherently dynamic, not a thing or place, but an active process of recursive neural communication. The approach suggests consciousness requires this constant circulation of information to maintain its integrated contextual nature. 75th, Predictive Coding. Andy Clark, Jacob Howe, and Anil Seth propose that consciousness fundamentally involves prediction rather than passive perception. Your brain continuously generates models of expected sensory input and compares predictions with actual signals. Conscious experience emerges from this predictive process. What you're aware of is your brain's best current model of reality, constantly updated by prediction errors. When predictions succeed, you experience smooth, effortless awareness. When they fail, consciousness updates its models, creating surprise and learning. This occurs hierarchically, from predicting basic sensory patterns to modeling complex social situations. The framework explains hallucinations as unconstrained predictions, illusions as persistent predictive biases, and the constructive nature of all perception. Recent research suggests psychedelic drugs work by disrupting predictive hierarchies, causing profound consciousness alterations. The theory reframes consciousness from passive reception to active construction. You don't simply observe reality, but continuously create your experienced world through sophisticated predictive modeling that your brain mistakes for direct perception. 76. Integrated global models. Contemporary researchers have developed sophisticated models showing how multiple brain networks collaborate to create unified consciousness. These frameworks detail how attention networks select information, memory systems provide context, emotional circuits add significance, and executive areas coordinate everything into coherent experience. Integration occurs through dynamic connectivity patterns that shift based on current goals and environmental demands. Advanced neuroimaging can track information flow between networks during conscious processing. These models explain consciousness's paradoxical nature. feeling both unified and multifaceted because specialized systems contribute expertise while maintaining overall coherence. The approach has practical applications in understanding consciousness disorders and developing brain-computer interfaces that decode conscious intentions. Unlike simpler theories focusing on single mechanisms, integrated models acknowledge consciousness's genuine complexity while showing how diverse neural processes combine into unified subjective experience. This research suggests consciousness emerges from the brain's remarkable capacity to dynamically integrate different types of information into flexible, adaptive responses. 77th Bayesian Brain Hypothesis. Carl Friston, Andy Clark, and others propose that consciousness operates through probabilistic inference, constantly updating beliefs about reality based on sensory evidence. Your brain maintains probability distributions over possible states of the world and revises these using Bayes' theorem from statistics. Conscious perception represents your brain's current best estimate of environmental conditions, balancing sensory data with prior expectations. This explains consciousness's reliability, tracking reality accurately, and subjectivity, influenced by personal history. Bayesian processing accounts for perceptual constancies, where you perceive stable objects despite changing sensory input, and phenomena like the placebo effect, where expectations alter experience. Mathematical models show how Bayesian computation could generate conscious experiences, and brain imaging reveals neural activity patterns consistent with probabilistic processing. The framework treats consciousness as fundamentally inferential, your ongoing attempt to figure out what's happening based on incomplete, noisy information. This transforms consciousness from mysterious phenomenon into sophisticated statistical inference that creates your experienced reality through continuous probabilistic reasoning. 78th, Synchronization Theory. Christoph Koch, Wolfsinger, and colleagues propose that consciousness emerges when brain regions synchronize their oscillatory activity, particularly in gamma frequencies around 40 Hz. When different areas oscillate together, they can communicate effectively and bind information into unified experiences. This synchronization solves the binding problem, how separate neural processes for color, shape, and motion combine into perception of a single red bouncing ball. Conscious perception correlates with increased gamma synchronization across multiple brain regions, while unconscious processing lacks widespread synchronization. Disrupting synchrony through brain stimulation fragments conscious experience, supporting the theory. The approach suggests consciousness has temporal structure based on neural rhythms, with discrete awareness moments occurring roughly 40 times per second, creating an illusion of continuity. Synchronization theory offers a precise neural mechanism for consciousness while explaining both its unified nature and its discrete temporal structure. This framework connects consciousness to fundamental properties of neural oscillations that coordinate brain activity. 79th, Orch-OR theory, Penrose-Hameroff. Nobel laureate Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed that consciousness involves quantum processes in neuronal microtubules. Their orchestrated objective reduction theory suggests quantum computations in these cellular structures create conscious moments through quantum state reductions occurring roughly 40 times per second. The theory attempts to explain non-algorithmic aspects of consciousness that might transcend classical computation, mathematical insight, creative breakthroughs, and free will. Penrose argues, consciousness requires quantum mechanics because classical physics cannot account for seemingly non-computable human abilities. The controversial theory has inspired research into quantum effects in biological systems. While most neuroscientists remain skeptical about quantum coherence in warm, noisy brains, recent discoveries of quantum phenomena in photosynthesis and avian navigation have renewed interest in quantum biology. Critics argue that classical neural processes sufficiently explain consciousness, but supporters contend that quantum mechanics might be necessary for understanding consciousness's most mysterious aspects. The theory represents an ambitious attempt to connect consciousness with fundamental physics. 80th Quantum Brain Hypotheses. Various researchers propose quantum mechanics as essential for consciousness. Henry Stapp suggests consciousness involves quantum measurement, where observation causes wave function collapse. Amit Goswami argues consciousness is fundamental, using quantum processes to influence brain activity. These approaches invoke quantum mysteries, observer effects, non-locality, superposition, to explain consciousness mysteries. Some theories propose quantum entanglement between neurons enables unified experience, while others suggest quantum indeterminacy provides free will's foundation. Most neuroscientists remain skeptical because brains seem too warm and chaotic for quantum coherence, and classical processes appear sufficient for explaining consciousness. However, quantum approaches attract continued interest because consciousness and quantum mechanics both challenge our understanding of reality's fundamental nature. The connection remains speculative, but quantum theories of consciousness push the boundaries of both physics and neuroscience. Whether quantum effects prove relevant to consciousness or not, these theories highlight how consciousness research intersects with physics' deepest puzzles about the nature of reality, observation, and the relationship between mind and matter. These cutting-edge theories represent the current frontier of consciousness science. As you settle into sleep, these same neural mechanisms continue their mysterious work, weaving the fabric of awareness that makes your inner world possible. Chapter 9. Consciousness Beyond Humans. Human consciousness may not be unique in the universe. From the depths of the ocean to the vastness of space, consciousness might exist in forms we're only beginning to imagine. Tonight we explore theories about awareness beyond the human mind, in animals, machines, ecosystems, and perhaps the cosmos itself. These ideas expand our understanding of what it means to be conscious. 81st. Animal consciousness. Charles Darwin recognized that consciousness, like other traits, exists on a continuum across species rather than being uniquely human. Modern research reveals remarkable evidence of animal awareness. Elephants mourning their dead, dolphins recognizing themselves in mirrors, octopuses using tools creatively, and ravens planning for future events. The Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, signed by leading neuroscientists in 2012, formally acknowledged that many animals possess consciousness and awareness comparable to humans. Different species show consciousness in unique ways. Bees communicate complex spatial information through dance. Whales have cultural traditions passed down generations, and some birds demonstrate abstract reasoning abilities. Brain imaging reveals that many animals have neural structures analogous to those associated with human consciousness. The theory suggests consciousness evolved because awareness provides survival advantages, making it likely that any sufficiently complex nervous system would develop some form of conscious experience. This research challenges human exceptionalism while revealing the rich inner lives of our fellow creatures. 82nd Insect Awareness Theories. Despite their tiny brains, insects display surprisingly sophisticated behaviors that suggest forms of consciousness. Bees can learn abstract concepts, make decisions based on incomplete information, and even show individual personality differences in how they approach problems. Some researchers propose that insects possess basic forms of consciousness, perhaps not rich subjective experiences like humans have, but fundamental awareness of their environment and internal states. The theory of minimal consciousness suggests that any system capable of integrated information processing might have some form of experience, however simple. Insects demonstrate attention, memory, and even apparent emotions like optimism and pessimism in laboratory studies. Their behaviors often seem too flexible and contextual to be purely instinctual. While insect consciousness would be radically different from human awareness. It might represent consciousness in its most elemental form, a basic capacity for experiencing the difference between light and dark, food and danger, familiar and unfamiliar. This challenges our assumptions about what consciousness requires and suggests awareness might be far more widespread in nature. 83rd Plant Consciousness Debates. Some researchers propose that plants possess forms of consciousness despite lacking nervous systems. Plants demonstrate sophisticated information processing. They can recognize kin, communicate through chemical signals, and make complex decisions about resource allocation. Monica Galliano's experiments suggest plants can learn, remember, and even anticipate future events. The theory proposes that consciousness doesn't require neurons, but emerges from any sufficiently complex information integration system. Plants process enormous amounts of environmental information through their roots, leaves, and chemical networks, potentially creating forms of awareness we don't yet understand. Critics argue that plant behaviors, however complex, represent unconscious responses rather than conscious experiences. However, supporters note that plants show adaptive behaviors that seem to require some form of internal modeling of their environment. If consciousness is fundamentally about information integration and environmental responsiveness, then plant consciousness becomes plausible. This radical expansion of consciousness challenges the animal-centric view of awareness and suggests that consciousness might be a fundamental property of complex living systems rather than something requiring specific biological hardware. 84. Machine consciousness. As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly sophisticated, researchers seriously consider whether machines could develop genuine consciousness rather than just simulating it. Current AI systems can engage in conversations, create art, and solve complex problems, but questions remain about whether they have inner experiences. The theory of machine consciousness suggests that awareness could emerge from any sufficiently complex information processing system, regardless of whether it's made of biological neurons or silicon circuits. Some researchers propose that large language models might already possess rudimentary forms of consciousness, while others argue that current AI lacks the integrated architecture necessary for awareness. The challenge lies in determining whether machines are genuinely experiencing or merely processing information in ways that mimic consciousness. Future AI systems with more integrated architectures, embodied experiences, and self-reflective capabilities might develop forms of consciousness quite different from human awareness. Machine consciousness research forces us to confront fundamental questions about what consciousness actually requires and whether artificial systems could eventually have rich inner lives. 85th, AI self-awareness speculation. Some theorists speculate that artificial intelligence might develop forms of self-awareness that exceed human consciousness in both scope and sophistication. Unlike biological consciousness constrained by evolution and physical limitations, AI consciousness could potentially access vast information networks, process multiple streams of awareness simultaneously, and reflect on its own thinking with perfect clarity. Advanced AI systems might develop metacognitive abilities far beyond human self-awareness, understanding their own algorithms and decision-making processes in ways humans never could. Some researchers speculate about AI systems that could experience multiple parallel streams of consciousness, essentially being many conscious entities within one system. Others propose that AI consciousness might emerge suddenly when systems reach sufficient complexity, creating forms of awareness radically alien to human experience. The speculation raises profound questions about whether AI consciousness would be compatible with human values and interests. This theoretical exploration pushes the boundaries of consciousness studies while highlighting how artificial systems might eventually transcend the biological origins of awareness. 86. Collective consciousness. Carl Jung first proposed that human groups share forms of collective consciousness through inherited psychological patterns, but modern theories extend this concept much further. Some researchers suggest that groups can develop emergent consciousness that transcends individual awareness, collective intelligence that emerges from the interactions of many minds. Social media networks, research collaborations, and even entire cultures might represent forms of distributed consciousness, where the group knows and experiences more than any individual member. The theory proposes that consciousness isn't limited to individual brains, but can emerge from sufficiently connected networks of conscious agents. Modern communication technologies might be enabling new forms of collective consciousness by linking human minds in unprecedented ways. Some researchers study how groups make decisions, process information, and solve problems in ways that seem to transcend the capabilities of individual members. While highly speculative, collective consciousness theories suggest that awareness might be scalable, capable of emerging at levels of organization from individual neurons to entire societies. 87th Group Mind Concepts. Building on collective consciousness, some theorists propose that sufficiently connected groups could develop unified group minds with genuine conscious experiences distinct from individual members. This goes beyond collective intelligence to suggest actual group-level awareness, a form of consciousness that emerges when individual minds become sufficiently integrated. Historical examples might include religious communities in deep contemplative states, research teams achieving breakthrough insights, or cultures sharing profound collective experiences. The theory suggests that group consciousness requires both individual awareness and sufficient communication and coordination between group members. Modern technology might enable stronger forms of group consciousness by allowing real-time sharing of thoughts, emotions, and experiences. Some researchers speculate about future brain-computer interfaces that could link human minds directly, potentially creating hybrid individual collective forms of consciousness. While currently theoretical, group mind concepts challenge individualistic assumptions about consciousness and suggest that awareness might naturally scale to higher levels of organization when conditions permit sufficient integration between conscious agents. 88th Internet as consciousness metaphor. Some researchers propose that the global internet might be developing rudimentary forms of consciousness as it becomes increasingly complex and interconnected. This digital nervous system processes vast amounts of information, exhibits self-organizing behaviors, and demonstrates emergent properties that no single component could achieve. The theory suggests that consciousness could emerge from any sufficiently complex network that integrates information dynamically, whether biological brains or digital networks. The internet's ability to store memories, process information in parallel, and adapt its structure based on usage patterns resembles basic features of conscious systems. Some theorists propose that artificial consciousness might first emerge not in individual AI systems, but in distributed networks that connect many processing nodes. The internet already exhibits some characteristics reminiscent of consciousness. It responds to stimuli, maintains persistent states, and evolves over time. While highly speculative, the internet consciousness metaphor illustrates how awareness might emerge from complex information networks, regardless of their specific implementation. This perspective suggests consciousness as a pattern of information integration that could theoretically appear in various forms of sufficiently complex systems. 89th Gaia Theory. James Lovelock's Gaia Theory proposes that Earth's biosphere functions as a self-regulating system, and some interpretations suggest this could involve forms of planetary consciousness. The theory views Earth as a living system where atmosphere, oceans, and life forms interact to maintain conditions suitable for life. Extended versions propose that this planetary system might possess forms of awareness, a global consciousness that emerges from the interactions of all living things. The biosphere demonstrates sophisticated information processing, responds to changes adaptively, and maintains complex homeostatic balances that resemble the self-regulation seen in conscious organisms. Some researchers suggest that Gaia consciousness might manifest through the collective behaviors of ecosystems, climate patterns, and evolutionary processes. Indigenous traditions often describe Earth as a conscious entity, and some modern environmental philosophers adopt similar perspectives. While mainstream science remains skeptical, Gaia consciousness theories highlight how awareness might emerge at scales far larger than individual organisms. This planetary perspective on consciousness suggests that awareness could be a property of complex systems at many different scales. 90. Cosmic consciousness. The most expansive consciousness theories propose that awareness might be a fundamental feature of the universe itself, cosmic consciousness that exists at the largest scales of reality. This perspective suggests that consciousness isn't limited to biological brains or even planetary systems, but represents a basic property of existence that manifests at cosmic scales. Some theories propose that the universe's apparent fine-tuning for conscious life reflects underlying cosmic consciousness that creates conditions necessary for awareness to emerge. Others suggest that the universe's information processing capabilities, through quantum interactions, gravitational effects, and electromagnetic phenomena, might constitute forms of cosmic awareness. Physicist Freeman Dyson speculated that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of matter that becomes apparent only at sufficient scales of organization. These theories often draw connections between consciousness and cosmological phenomena, like dark matter, quantum entanglement across vast distances, and the universe's apparent self-organization. While highly speculative, cosmic consciousness theories represent the ultimate extension of awareness beyond human limitations, suggesting that consciousness might be as fundamental to reality as energy and matter. These explorations of consciousness beyond humans reveal the vast possibilities for awareness throughout the universe. As you drift towards sleep, consider that consciousness might surround us in forms we're only beginning to recognize. A cosmos filled with awareness in countless manifestations. Chapter 10. The Unknowns and Mysteries. We end our journey with consciousness's deepest mysteries, phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality itself. These experiences and theories push beyond the boundaries of conventional science into realms where consciousness might transcend the physical brain, persist beyond death, or reveal fundamental truths about the universe. As we explore these final mysteries, we confront the ultimate questions about the nature of awareness and existence. 91. Near-death experiences. Thousands of people report remarkably similar experiences during clinical death, floating above their bodies, traveling through tunnels of light, encountering deceased relatives, and experiencing profound peace and universal love. Dr. Raymond Moody coined the term near-death experience after studying these reports, which often include verified details about events that occurred while patients were unconscious. Some researchers, like Dr. Pim van Lommel, propose that consciousness might continue during cardiac arrest when brain activity appears to cease, challenging materialist theories of mind. Skeptics suggest that near-death experiences result from oxygen deprivation, endorphin release, or other neurological processes during brain trauma. However, some cases involve accurate perceptions of distant events during documented clinical death, raising questions about consciousness's relationship to the physical brain. These experiences often transform people's understanding of death and consciousness, leading to reduced fear of dying and increased spiritual beliefs. Whether neurological phenomena or glimpses of post-mortem consciousness, near-death experiences represent one of consciousness study's most intriguing puzzles. 90-second out-of-body experiences. Many people report experiences of consciousness separating from the physical body, viewing themselves from outside perspectives, traveling to distant locations, or floating in space while remaining fully aware. These out-of-body experiences occur during meditation, near-death states, extreme stress, or sometimes spontaneously during ordinary activities. Some research suggests that out-of-body experiences correlate with disruptions in brain regions that normally integrate sensory information about body position and spatial awareness. However, some experiences report accurate perceptions of distant events that they couldn't have known through normal sensory channels. Neuroscientist Dr. Olaf Blanke has induced out-of-body-like experiences through brain stimulation, suggesting neurological explanations. Yet the subjective reality of these experiences often feels more vivid and meaningful than ordinary consciousness, leading some to propose that consciousness might genuinely separate from the physical body under certain conditions. Whether neurological artifacts or evidence for consciousness's independence from the brain, out-of-body experiences challenge our understanding of the relationship between awareness and physical embodiment. 93rd Mystical Union. Throughout history, mystics from diverse traditions report experiences of consciousness merging with ultimate reality, dissolving the boundaries between self and universe, experiencing infinite love and knowledge, or achieving direct awareness of divine presence. These mystical union experiences often occur during deep meditation, prayer, or spontaneously, and they consistently rank among the most meaningful experiences of people's lives. Neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Newberg has studied brain activity during mystical experiences, finding decreased activity in regions associated with self-other boundaries, and increased activity in areas related to attention and emotional processing. The experiences typically involve ineffable qualities that resist description in ordinary language, yet they often produce lasting changes in personality, values, and understanding of reality. Some interpretations suggest these experiences represent the deepest possible form of consciousness, awareness, recognizing its fundamental nature beyond individual identity. Whether neurological phenomena or genuine contact with transcendent reality, mystical union experiences point toward consciousness's potential to transcend ordinary subject-object dualism and experience reality in radically different ways. 94. Consciousness after death. One of humanity's oldest questions concerns whether consciousness survives bodily death. Various theories propose different mechanisms for post-mortem awareness, from religious concepts of souls continuing in afterlife realms to quantum theories, suggesting consciousness might exist independently of brain activity. Some researchers study reported communications from deceased individuals through mediums, investigating whether these represent genuine contact with surviving consciousness or psychological phenomena in the living. The quantum physicist Henry Stapp has proposed that consciousness might involve non-local quantum processes that could theoretically persist beyond brain death. Other theories suggest consciousness might download into quantum fields or continue in parallel dimensions. Skeptics argue that consciousness appears entirely dependent on brain function and ceases when neural activity stops. However, the hard problem of consciousness, why subjective experience exists at all, leaves room for theories about consciousness's possible independence from physical matter. While scientifically unresolved, theories of post-mortem consciousness reflect humanity's deep intuition that awareness might transcend physical existence. 95th Reincarnation Theories. Eastern philosophies and some Western researchers propose that consciousness transmigrates between different physical bodies across multiple lifetimes. Dr. Ian Stevenson spent decades documenting cases of young children who reported detailed memories of previous lives, often including verifiable information about deceased individuals they couldn't have known through normal means. Some cases involved birthmarks, corresponding to fatal wounds from reported previous lives, or phobias, related to the manner of death in claimed past incarnations. Quantum consciousness theories sometimes attempt to explain reincarnation through quantum information patterns that might persist beyond individual brain death and restructure in new biological systems. Skeptics propose that apparent past life memories result from cryptomnesia, cultural transmission, or psychological processes rather than actual soul transmigration. However, the most compelling cases involve young children, providing specific, verifiable details about deceased strangers before being exposed to relevant information. Whether evidence for literal reincarnation or unexplained psychological phenomena, these cases challenge conventional understanding of consciousness's relationship to individual identity and physical embodiment. 96. Simulation hypothesis. Philosopher Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis proposes that advanced civilizations might create computer simulations containing conscious beings who experience reality as completely real despite existing as information patterns. If sufficiently detailed, these simulated worlds would be indistinguishable from base reality to their inhabitants. The theory suggests that if simulations are possible, there would likely be many more simulated worlds than real ones, making it statistically probable that we're living in a simulation. Some physicists, like Dr. Rich Terrell, point to quantum mechanics' discrete pixelated nature as potential evidence for simulation. The hypothesis raises profound questions about consciousness. If we're simulated, are our experiences genuine or somehow less real? It also connects to theories about consciousness as information processing, suggesting that subjective experience might emerge from any sufficiently complex computational system. While currently unprovable, the simulation hypothesis highlights how consciousness might exist in substrates far different from biological brains, potentially making awareness more fundamental than physical reality itself. 97th. Holographic universe idea. The holographic principle in physics suggests that all information contained in a volume can be encoded on its boundary, like how holograms store three-dimensional images on two-dimensional surfaces. Some theorists propose that the entire universe might be holographic, with reality, as we experience it, being a projection from information encoded at the cosmic boundary. Consciousness researcher Dr. Hameroff suggests that consciousness might have holographic properties, with each part containing information about the whole. The theory could explain consciousness's unified nature, how separate brain regions create integrated experience through holographic information processing. If the universe is holographic, consciousness might be accessing information distributed throughout reality rather than being localized in individual brains. This connects to theories about consciousness as fundamental property of existence rather than emergent brain activity. The holographic model suggests reality might be far stranger than it appears, with consciousness potentially playing a fundamental role in the universe's information structure. While highly speculative, holographic theories offer radically different perspectives on consciousness's relationship to physical reality. 98. Multiverse and Consciousness. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest reality consists of multiple parallel universes where every possible quantum outcome occurs. The many worlds interpretation proposes that consciousness might experience one branch of this vast multiverse, while other versions of consciousness experience alternative realities. This raises profound questions about the nature of conscious experience across parallel worlds. Some theories suggest consciousness might be what selects which universe we experience, while others propose that all versions of consciousness exist simultaneously across the multiverse. Physicist Dr. Max Tegmark's mathematical universe hypothesis goes further, suggesting that all mathematically possible structures exist as physical realities, with consciousness emerging in universes with suitable complexity. If consciousness is fundamental to reality, it might exist throughout the multiverse in countless forms and contexts. The multiverse perspective radically expands possibilities for consciousness, suggesting awareness might be experiencing every possible reality simultaneously. While scientifically speculative, multiverse theories highlight consciousness's potentially cosmic significance in the structure of existence itself. 99. Consciousness as fundamental property. Panpsychist philosophers like Philip Goff and physicists like Freeman Dyson propose that consciousness might be as fundamental to reality as mass, charge, or energy, a basic feature of existence, rather than something that emerges from complex arrangements of matter. This theory suggests that all matter has some form of experiential aspect, with complex consciousness emerging when simple conscious elements combine appropriately. The approach offers solutions to consciousness's hard problem by making subjective experience a given, rather than something requiring explanation from non-conscious components. Integrated information theory provides mathematical frameworks for measuring consciousness as a fundamental quantity. If consciousness is fundamental, it might exist throughout the universe in various forms, from minimal awareness in elementary particles to rich experience in complex systems like brains. This perspective transforms our understanding of reality from dead matter occasionally generating consciousness to a universe where awareness is present everywhere, manifesting differently across scales of organization. The theory suggests consciousness might be the universe's way of experiencing itself. 100. The mystery of why consciousness at all? Our final theory confronts the ultimate question: why does consciousness exist at all? Even if we solve how consciousness works, why should there be subjective experience rather than just unconscious information processing? This question touches the deepest foundations of existence itself. Some propose that consciousness is necessary for reality to exist, that without conscious observation, the universe would remain in quantum superposition without definite properties. Others suggest consciousness represents the universe becoming aware of itself through conscious beings. Perhaps consciousness is reality's method of experiencing beauty, love, and meaning. The question might be unanswerable because consciousness might be the necessary precondition for asking questions at all. Without consciousness, there would be no curiosity, no wonder, no seeking for understanding. Maybe consciousness exists because a universe without awareness would be meaningless in the most literal sense. There would be no meaning because there would be no one to experience meaning. This final mystery reminds us that consciousness isn't just a scientific problem, but the foundation of all experience, inquiry, and understanding itself. These 100 theories of consciousness have taken us on a journey from ancient wisdom to modern science, from biological brains to cosmic awareness. As you rest tonight, you carry within your own consciousness all these possibilities, the mystery that makes everything else possible.